There is a specific reason why you remain a beginner in almost every ambitious project you start, and it is not because you lack discipline or talent. You are suffering from a structural error in how you approach learning itself, a modern disease that convinces you to build the roof of the house before you have laid the foundation. Today, I am going to hand you the ancient source code for mastery, a system so potent it turned peasants into lethal warriors. But before we dissect your psychology, I invite you to subscribe to the channel right now. Join us and let us cure the mediocrity that the modern world has forced upon you. Have you ever noticed how a select few seem to master everything they touch? With terrifying speed, they pick up a musical instrument and sound professional in months. They learn a new language in a year. They build businesses while you are still stuck watching tutorials. The world looks at them and whispers talent or gifted, using these words as a shield to protect their own egos. It is easier to believe they are magical than to admit they know something you do not. The brutal truth is that talent is the biggest lie you tell yourself to justify quitting. The people who master reality do not have a better brain than you. They have a better map. They possess a secret framework that was never taught in your schools, never mentioned in your college lectures, and certainly not found in the online courses you buy and never finish. This framework dates back to feudal Japan, and it is the dividing line between the amateur who dabbles and the master who transcends. This system is called shuhari. It is a three-stage evolution of the human spirit. When you understand how it actually works, not just the surface definition, but the deep neurological reprogramming it requires, you will stop being the person who starts 1,000 projects and finishes 0. You will become a finisher. But I must warn you, understanding this system requires you to accept a painful truth about your current behavior that your ego will hate to hear. Let us travel back to the source. The story takes place in the 17th century, in the rugged, rain-soaked provinces of feudal Japan. We follow a young man named Takeshi. Takeshi was not born into nobility. He was a nobody, a farmer's son with dirt under his fingernails and a dream that was statistically impossible. He did not want to plant rice. He wanted to be a samurai. Takeshi possessed an obsession that burned through him like a fever, while other boys in the village accepted their fate as laborers. Takeshi would sit by the roadside for hours watching the samurai march past. He studied the terrifying stillness of their hands, the discipline in their gaze, and the lethal economy of their movements. He wanted that power more than he wanted to breathe. At 16, unable to afford a teacher, Takeshi carved a crude wooden sword, a bokken from a fallen oak branch. He retreated into the forest, determined to teach himself. He woke before the sun rose and practiced the moves he had mimicked from the warriors on the road. Horizontal strikes, vertical slashes, thrusts. He grinded for hours every single day, fueled by the modern delusion that hard work alone is enough. 6 months passed, then a year. By all metrics, Takeshi should have been improving. He had put in the hours. He had sweat into the earth. But the reality was a tragedy. He hadn't improved at all. In fact, his movements were stiff, his balance was precarious, and the sword felt like a foreign object in his clumsy hands. The more he practiced, the more frustrated he became. He tried to compensate with intellectual knowledge. He stole glances at ancient manuscripts about strategy. He memorized the names of classical techniques. He could recite the code of Bushido by heart. He had all the information, yet he had none of the skill. When he picked up the sword, the knowledge evaporated, leaving him exposed and incompetent. A full year of his life had been wasted. Takeshi remained a peasant with a stick trapped in the valley of disappointment. This is exactly where you are right now with your half-finished novel, your abandoned coding project, or that guitar gathering dust in the corner. You are grinding, but you are not moving. And then one afternoon in the forest, Takeshi met the man who would destroy his ego to save his life. Takeshi was mid-swing when a voice cut through the air like a razor, indifferent and cold. "Your feet are wrong. Your posture is offensive. Your breathing is desperate. Everything you are doing is a waste of energy." The voice did not sound angry. It sounded bored, which was infinitely worse. Takeshi froze, the wooden sword trembling in his grip, and slowly turned around to face his critic. Standing at the edge of the clearing was an older man, his gray hair pulled back tight, deep scars mapping the history of violence on his face. He wore two swords at his waist, not as decoration, but as extensions of his limbs. He was a true samurai, the kind that did not need to raise his voice to command a room. Takeshi felt the heat of shame burn his neck. He was a child caught playing dress-up by a professional soldier. I am trying to learn on my own, sir," Takeshi stammered, lowering his weapon. "I have no master, so I teach myself." The samurai walked slowly around him, his eyes dissecting every flaw in Takeshi's stance. "How long have you been practicing this way?" he asked. "1 year, sir," Takeshi replied with a hint of pride. "And has anything improved?" The silence that followed was suffocating because the answer was obvious. The samurai reached out and effortlessly plucked the wooden sword from Takeshi's hand, weighing it with disdain. "You know what your problem is, boy. You think you are training, but you are not. You are cementing mistakes. Every failed repetition is teaching your nervous system how to fail more efficiently. You have spent a year becoming an expert at being wrong." Those words hit harder than physical violence. Takeshi felt his defense crumbling. "But sir," he argued, his voice breaking, "I have read every text I can find. I have studied the strategies of the great generals. I have memorized the movements mentally. I know the theory." This is the same excuse you use when you watch 10 hours of coding tutorials, but never write a single line of original code. "That is exactly your problem," the samurai interrupted, tossing the wooden stick back to him. "You are trying to build a castle starting from the roof. You studied strategy before you mastered posture. You tried to innovate before you could imitate. You skipped the boring part because your ego wanted the glory of the result, without the humility of the process." The samurai stepped closer, invading Takeshi's personal space. "There is a path to mastery that has existed for centuries. It has 3 distinct stages. You must traverse each one in order. You cannot skip. You cannot rush. If you try to shortcut this process, you will spend your entire life being mediocre at everything you touch forever, a dabbler, never a master." Takeshi looked at the man, seeing a lifeline in the depths of his humiliation. "Which way is that?" he asked. "Teach me." The samurai stared at him for a long moment, assessing whether the boy had the stomach for what was coming. "It is called Shuhari," he replied. 3 syllables, 3 worlds, 1 destination. Shu, obey. Ha, break. Re, transcend. The samurai recited, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Most people never leave the first stage because they think they are too smart for it. They think repetition is beneath them. But if you want to be my student, you will have to kill your ego today, right here in this mud." Takeshi dropped to his knees and bowed. "Please, I will do anything." The samurai nodded once, a sharp, final motion. "Come back tomorrow at dawn, and prepare yourself. The first stage Shu is not about learning to fight. It is about learning to suffer boredom without losing your mind. Tomorrow we destroy everything you think you know." Dawn broke over the mountains, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gray. Takeshi was waiting when the samurai walked into the clearing, looking as if he hadn't slept, or perhaps didn't need to. "Today begins Shu," the master announced, his voice flat. "At this stage you are not a warrior, you are a mirror. You do not think, you do not question, you do not improvise, you obey. You copy exactly what I do with 0 deviation. If I move my finger, you move yours. If I stop, you stop." The samurai assumed a basic stance, knees bent, spine straight, sword held at a precise 45-degree angle. "Stay like this," he commanded. Takeshi imitated the pose, thinking it was easy. The master walked over and kicked Takeshi's heel. "Wrong. 2 centimeters to the left. He poked Takeshi's lower back. Wrong. Tilt your pelvis forward. He slapped Takeshi's shoulder. Wrong. Drop the tension. You look like a frightened crane, not a killer. Now breathe, the master ordered. 3 seconds in through the nose. Hold for 2 seconds. 4 seconds out through the mouth. Do not stop. They stayed in that single static position for 10 minutes, then 20, then an hour. Takeshi's legs began to tremble uncontrollably. Lactic acid flooded his thighs, burning like fire. His mind started to scream that this was a meaningless torture, a prank played by a sadist. Master, Takeshi finally gasped, breaking his rhythm. My legs are shaking. When are we going to practice real techniques? When do I learn to strike? The samurai slowly turned his head, his expression reading a mixture of pity and disappointment. This is the moment every beginner faces the gap between the fantasy of the montage and the reality of the grind. You think posture is boring? The samurai asked quietly. You think breathing is a waste of time. That is why you will never be a samurai. A true warrior understands that mastery is not built in kilometers, it is built in millimeters. If you cannot control your own breath while standing still, how do you expect to control a sword while someone is trying to kill you? Takeshi swallowed his complaint and returned to the stance. Shu is not about being interesting. The master continued pacing around him. It is about obeying until your body understands what your mind cannot yet grasp. Every complex technique you will learn in 5 years depends on this specific posture you are hating right now. If the foundation is weak, the castle collapses. Hold it. Weeks turned into months. The routine was brutal in its monotony. Breathing, stance, basic grip, no duels, no flashy spins, just the basics repeated ad nauseum. Takeshi's mind fought him every day. This is too slow, he thought. I could be learning faster on my own. I am wasting my youth standing in the mud. This is the boredom filter that weeds out 99% of people from achieving greatness. But then something began to shift. It was invisible at first, a subtle change in the texture of his experience. The movements began to flow without conscious effort. The posture that had been agony now felt like a resting state. The breathing pattern he had to force was now happening automatically. His nervous system was being rewritten, hard-coding the software of the warrior into his biological hardware. One day, 3 months in, the master drew a line in the air with his blade. A horizontal strike, he said, 1,000 times, exactly as I did it. Not faster, not harder, not better, identical. Takeshi spent the entire week on that single motion, 1,000 repetitions a day. Repetition is not insanity. Repetition is the mother of skill. On the 4th day during repetition number 400, something extraordinary happened. Takeshi didn't command his arm to move. The arm simply moved. The sword cut the air with a perfect whoosh, stopping exactly where it needed to without a single micro-adjustment from his brain. It was as if the sword knew the way. Did you feel it? The master asked from the shadows. Takeshi nodded, speechless. The barrier between thought and action had dissolved. That is Shu, the master said, stepping into the light. When the technique enters the body so deeply that the mind is no longer invited to the meeting. This is the neuroscience of automation. When you repeat a movement 300 to 500 times, your cerebellum begins to pattern match, but it takes thousands of correct repetitions to move that skill from the conscious cortex to the automatic basal ganglia. You cannot rush biology. 6 months of Shu passed. Takeshi now mastered 12 basic techniques so thoroughly he could perform them while half asleep. Literally, one night the master woke him with a bucket of cold water and a wooden strike. Takeshi parried it before his eyes were fully open, but as his competence grew, so did a new kind of doubt. He began to look at other students from rival schools who knew hundreds of fancy moves. Master, Takeshi asked one morning watching a group of merchants discuss a famous duel. Why do some warriors know so many techniques but fight worse than I do? They know every kata, every name, every variation, but they move like broken puppets. The samurai smiled, a rare expression that cracked his weathered face. Finally, you ask the right question. Those men live in the hell of the eternal student, the master explained. They collect techniques like children collect shiny stones. They learn something new before they have mastered the last thing. They read 1,000 books, but never internalize a single sentence. They confuse knowing the map with walking the territory. Knowledge is just information. Mastery is cellular. The master walked to a large oak tree. Shu gave you the foundation. You obeyed blindly. You surrendered your ego. You became a vessel, and now, he paused, placing a hand on the rough bark. Now you are ready to break. Takeshi frowned, confused. Break, what, master the sword? No, the master replied. You are ready to break the rules I gave you. This is the transition to Ha. He drew a circle in the dirt. Shu is this circle. These are the limits I placed on you to keep you safe and focused. Now in Ha, you must step outside the circle, but be careful. Most people confuse Ha with rebellion. They break the rules not because they have mastered them, but because they are lazy. Ha is not about rejecting what you learned, the master continued. It is about understanding the why behind the what. It is about adaptation. You can only break the form once the form is inside you. That afternoon, the master brought a stranger to the clearing, a warrior from a southern province with a completely different fighting style. For the next year, the master announced, you will train with him too. His style contradicts mine. I teach you to wait. He will teach you to charge. I teach you silence. He will teach you the kiai, shout. You will learn techniques that seem to violate everything I have taught you. Takeshi felt a surge of panic. But won't that ruin my training? Won't I get confused? If your Shu was weak, yes, you would be destroyed, the master said. You would become a confused hybrid with no identity. But your Shu is granite. Because your foundation is solid, you will not break. Instead, you will begin to see the universal principles that live underneath all styles. You will stop seeing my way versus his way and start seeing the way. So began the Ha stage. Mornings with his original master, afternoons with the southern instructor. At first, Takeshi's brain felt like it was splitting in two. The low, grounded stance clashed with the high, mobile footwork. It felt like trying to speak German and French in the same sentence. But after 3 months of cognitive dissonance, synthesis began to occur. Takeshi began to realize that beneath the superficial differences, both masters were teaching the exact same thing. How to manage distance, how to manipulate the opponent's center of gravity, and how to strike with the whole body rather than just the arm. The techniques were different wrappers for the same physics. The Ha stage was not about collecting more moves. It was about seeing the invisible skeleton that held all moves together. One morning during intense sparring, Takeshi blocked an attack, using the first master's immovable grounded stance, but instantly countered with the second master's explosive lunging thrust. He didn't plan it. His brain didn't say, now combine A with B. It just happened. The movement was a hybrid, a bastard child of two philosophies that was stronger than either parent. The two masters looked at each other and nodded. What was that? The southern teacher asked, wiping sweat from his brow. I don't know, Takeshi admitted, looking at his hands. It just felt right. His original master stepped forward. That is Ha. You are no longer blindly obeying. You are adapting. You understand the rules well enough to rewrite them. But be warned, the master said, his face growing serious again. This is where 99% of practitioners stop. They reach the Ha stage and think they are gods. They can mix styles, they can improvise, they can dazzle the crowd. They become skilled, but they never become masters. They are still trapped by the techniques, even if they are juggling them creatively. There is a third stage. the master whispered as if sharing a dangerous secret. The final stage, Re. And only one person in 1,000 gets there because it requires you to do something that feels like madness. You must forget everything I taught you. Takeshi stared at him. Forget after 5 years of blood and sweat. Re is the stage where you do not use techniques, the master explained. The techniques use you, or rather, the concept of technique dissolves entirely. There is no block, no strike, no parry. There is only pure, unadulterated response to the reality of the moment. Takeshi shook his head. How can I fight without techniques? That is suicide. You will understand in time, the master said. But first, a story. When I was young like you, I was arrogant. I knew 300 techniques. I had defeated men twice my size. Then I challenged an old hermit to a duel. He was 80 years old, frail, walking with a cane. I thought I would go easy on him. The duel lasted 3 seconds. I attacked with my fastest combination. He didn't block it. He didn't dodge it in a way I recognized. He simply was not there. And then I was on the ground, his cane at my throat. I asked him, what style was that? What technique did you use? I was desperate to categorize his victory so my ego could survive it. The old man laughed and said, I don't use techniques, boy. I stopped fighting years ago. Now I just listen. When you move, I am already the answer to your movement. I do not decide to strike. The strike happens because the space you left open demanded it. That is Re, the state where the dancer becomes the dance. Takeshi spent the next 5 years chasing this ghost. The master stopped teaching him new things. Instead, he just made Takeshi fight, endlessly, against tall opponents, short opponents, multiple opponents. At first, Takeshi was still thinking, now I use technique A, now I switch to B. His mind was a loud, chattering manager trying to micromanage his body. But slowly, over thousands of hours of sparring, the manager in his brain began to go quiet. The labels fell off the techniques. He stopped seeing horizontal slash and just saw opening. He stopped thinking parry and just felt flow. The gap between perception and action, which used to be a wide canyon, narrowed until it was a hairline fracture. One day, during a chaotic melee against 3 attackers, simultaneously something snapped, or rather, something opened. Takeshi didn't remember making any decisions. He didn't think block left, spin right. His body simply became a cloud of violence. He moved with a terrifying grace, dodging steel by millimeters, his own sword finding gaps that were open for only a fraction of a second. When the dust settled, all 3 opponents were on the ground, disarmed. Takeshi stood there breathing calmly, his heart rate barely elevated. He looked at his sword as if seeing it for the first time. He couldn't recall a single specific technique he had used. It was like he had been watching a movie of himself fighting. His master stepped forward, a smile finally breaking through his stoic mask. You finally stopped fighting, he said softly. But master, I just fought 3 men. Takeshi replied, confused. No, the master corrected. Your body fought. You were out of the way. There was no Takeshi in that circle making choices. There was only pure response. This is Re. Modern science calls this transient hypofrontality, or flow state. A researcher at Kyoto University discovered that when experts reach this level, the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for conscious planning and thinking, actually shuts down. The expert is no longer doing the skill. The skill is expressing itself through the expert. Neurologically, the dancer and the dance have become the same circuit. Decades passed. Takeshi was no longer the village boy with the impossible dream. He was the master. Young men traveled from distant provinces to learn from him, carrying their own egos and impatience. They would sit at his feet and ask the same metric-obsessed questions. Master, how many techniques do you know? Master, how long until I am a black belt? Master, what is the secret move? Takeshi would always answer, I know nothing. I have no techniques. This infuriated them. They wanted lists. They wanted a curriculum. They wanted to buy mastery like a product. One day, a particularly arrogant young student, a nobleman's son, couldn't take it anymore. "You are a fraud," he shouted. "My old instructor knew 500 named techniques. You claim to know none. Prove you are better." Takeshi stood up slowly, his joints clicking with age, and picked up a wooden sword. "Attack me," he said calmly. "Use your best technique, the one you are most proud of." The young man grinned, confident in his complexity. He launched a dragon's tail strike, a complex multi-stage attack he had rehearsed for years. Takeshi didn't even seem to move. There was just a slight shift of weight, a subtle turn of the hips, and suddenly the young man was face down in the dirt, his weapon flying across the yard. Takeshi hadn't used a counter move. He had simply occupied the space the young man needed to stand in. Takeshi helped the boy up. "You used a technique against me," he explained gently. "A specific rigid pattern. It is a good pattern. It works 90% of the time. But because it is a pattern, it is predictable. I did not use a technique. I simply responded to the reality of the moment. That is the difference between knowing 500 moves and knowing 0. You have 500 options. I have infinite options." Takeshi's story is not just about swords and samurai. It is a direct allegory for anything you want to master in the 21st century. Do you want to learn guitar? Shuhari is the only way. In Shu, you copy the solos note for note. You do not improvise. You do not add your soul. You just force your clumsy fingers to replicate the master's pattern until the neural pathways are burned in. Do you want to write code? Shuhari. In Shu, you type out the code of experienced developers line by line. You do not try to reinvent the algorithm. You do not try to be clever. You surrender your need for validation and simply upload the syntax into your brain. Only in Ha do you begin to optimize. Only in Ri do you write code that looks like poetry solving problems before they even occur. But here is the trap, the reason most of you will never experience the Ri state. You refuse to submit to Shu. You live in a culture that worships creativity and disruption before it respects competence. You hear people say, "I don't like following rules. I prefer to find my own style." That sounds noble, but it is a toxic lie your ego tells you to avoid the humiliation of being a beginner. Let me be surgically honest with you. You do not have a style yet. You have habits, and most of your habits are bad. When you try to find your own way without first mastering the established way, you are not being an innovator, you are being an amateur. Takeshi could have said, "I am unique," and he would have died a farmer. He became a legend because he accepted that he was nothing before he could become something. So here is your protocol. Not for tomorrow, but for right now. First, choose one skill, just one. If you try to master 2 things at once, you are choosing to be mediocre at both. Second, find one master. It doesn't have to be a person you know. It can be a book, a course, or an online mentor. But pick one source of truth and ignore everything else. Third, enter the Shu stage with total humility. Copy their work. Imitate their process. Do not change a single variable. When your brain screams, "This is boring," or "I know a better way," recognize that voice as the enemy. Boredom is the tax you pay for mastery. If you are not bored, you are probably just playing, not training. An Oxford University study on expertise found that across every domain from chess to surgery, no true master skipped the imitation phase. The child prodigies you admire, they spent their childhoods ruthlessly copying the masters who came before them. The only difference between them and you is that they didn't quit when the repetition got painful. They understood that the long road is actually the fastest road. Takeshi lived to be 87. On his deathbed, surrounded by his students, he was asked his greatest regret. He said, I regret the 1 year I spent trying to teach myself in the woods. I thought I was smart enough to skip the basics. I wasted time trying to reinvent the wheel. If I had submitted to a master on day 1, I would have had 1 more year of perfection. Shuhari is not just a learning method. It is a mirror. Look into it. Do you see a person who is constantly jumping from trend to trend, looking for a shortcut? Or do you see someone with the strength to be a fool today, so they can be a master tomorrow? There is a version of you that is capable of greatness, but that version must first learn how to kneel. The path is open, the steps are clear. Shu, then Ha, then Ri. There are no hacks, there is only the work. If this video woke you up, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because we are going to go much deeper into the psychology of mastery in the coming weeks. Now stop watching, turn off your screen, and go do your first rep. Happy journey.